What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be talking about rhythm. We're going to be talking about the law of rhythm. If you're familiar with the Hermetic teachings, the Kabbalion, the Emerald Tablets, you will have heard of this law. One of the 7 Hermetic principles. Lately, we've been talking about polarity in the last couple of videos, and I'm going to expound on the idea of rhythm as it applies to polarity so that we can better understand how to manifest our reality, because manifestation really comes down to, a lot of it comes down to state control, emotional state control. You know, Neville Goddard talks about occupying the state, right? So we're going to expound on these ideas. I'm going to show you in this video, by the end of this video, you're going to understand how the principle of rhythm, how we can use it to our advantage, and how we use it to stop flip-flopping back and forth between the ends of the polarity. And this polarity thing goes for everything. As you'll see, everything in life exists on a spectrum, really. And there's this juxtaposition, there's this false binary that we get as human beings. You know, I talk about this a lot, right? The black and white thinking. Either end of the polarity, and life really operates more in the shades of gray. It's really a false, it's a cognitive fallacy to believe that it's this way or it's this way. So we're going to get into this. So rhythm. Okay, so we've been discussing lately, right, that we have 2 ends of this spectrum. There is, at either end of the spectrum, this could go for anything, right? One thing that we think about is, this is bad, this is good, and we apply different things to these things. You know, in our culture has informed the lens through which we see things, and there's a lot of cognitive fallacies that we believe in. For example, we think that, you know, to be polite is to be good, to be, you could call it rude, is to be bad. But they're actually, if you're overly polite, that means that you don't have a backbone. You're not going to assert for what you believe in. You're not going to stand up for your values. You're not going to, you know, anybody to be effective in a company, for example, has to possess some of this ability. Maybe you don't want to call it rude. Rude has a negative connotation, but they have to possess a little bit of that type of asshole type energy, right? Or else nobody's going to respect them. If they're constantly, like worried about being polite all the time, and your boss comes in and he doesn't want to step on any toes, the company's going to go downhill because he's not stepping in with that assertiveness, that energy that says, hey, no, we're not doing that. Like, I don't like this idea. He's not going to come in with like an ad hominem attack to say, oh, you're stupid. But he might have to say, hey, this idea is stupid. We're not going to do this. This is a bad idea, right? Because if you're constantly worried and tiptoeing around all the time about worrying about hurting people's feelings, in a company scenario, or let's say in the military or any sort of organization, the organization is gonna fall apart very quickly. There has to be boundaries, there has to be structure, there has to be order. So what I want to get into though with this video is basically when we're using the law of rhythm, the alchemical masters talk about how everything, basically, you can view this as like a pendulum. It's swinging back and forth, right? Everything in the universe operates like this. Another way of thinking about this is it's like a wave. And, you know, the cycles and seasons, we get fall, winter, spring, summer. Everything is constantly going up, down. The stock market, the emotion, our emotional regulation, our emotional patterns, we go up, we go down. And what the Kabbalion says, what these Hermetic principles point to, is that the alchemical masters, the ones who mastered the 4 dimension, are the master of mastering this rhythm so that they almost transcend the cycles and they're able to stay balanced. This is also what the Stoics talk about, you know, in Stoicism. It's that being at the heart, being at the control of your emotions so that you're not getting into a reactive pattern. It's also something that is in the Eastern philosophy, Wu Wei. Wu Wei means, to translate it into English, it means effortless action. So again, on one side of this pendulum, we can see, and let's get rid of this because this is going to be confusing. It's not always good or bad. That's the false binary that we get taught. So on one side of this, we have this as hustle, hard work, grinding. And here we have, I guess we could just call it manifesting. The idea being that we just simply, another way of thinking about this is the 4D and this is the 3D, right? We're ultimately, our ultimate concern and preoccupation when we're hustling is the 3D. It's saying, okay, what time am I waking up? How many hours of work am I putting into this thing? All of the physical action, all of the physical effort that I'm taking. To get into this Wu Wei effortless action, that's this. You know, we've seen this before, right? What is this? This is balance. This is, again, balance right here. This is the combination or the ability to ride through these rhythms, but then remain calm. And it's not always possible to remain at this exact straight line. Obviously, there is going to be some of this, but what we tend to do when we begin to learn this, when we begin to have emotional regulation, there's many ways we can do that. There's many ways that we can regulate our emotions. We have breath work. We have meditation. You could do a visualization process. We have our affirmation practices. Getting into our body, you could call those somatic practices, which will help us get into that feeling sense. But when we accept that neither extreme is actually the truth and that reality is operating much more in the shade of gray, and that we understand that there is coming back to the law of three again, we have the mental plane, we have the spiritual plane, and we also have the physical plane. And when we acknowledge that neither has to be the case, we're able to get closer to this. And life begins to come much more like this, right? Much more steady. We're not going up so high, followed by such an emotional low, followed by another emotional high, because we're gaining control over this pattern. We're gaining control over these emotional ups and downs. And we're declaring that we are at the cause, that we're not at the effect so much of the 3D, which is causing us as this pendulum to go back and forth and back and forth. Because as soon as we get one win, we feel amazing. We're feeling that high, right? And then as soon as something happens that's bad, we get into those really crazy emotional lows, right? Another thing that you could liken this to is, like, another example here on this law of polarity and rhythm is scarcity or abundance. What do we do when we come in from a scarce mindset? What is a scarcity mindset, first of all? The scarcity mindset operates from the lens of reality, or sometimes we call it frames, where your frame, your perspective, the lens through which you see reality is, use this example before, you got clouds, you got rain coming down, it's a storm, okay, and then you have another frame here. It's kind of like the glass half empty or the glass half full paradigm. What is this? This is sunshine. This is the glass half full. This is the glass half empty. And at any situation, at any point, any given point in time, we have the ability to declare, to operate from our frame of reference, which says, hey, I see the positive in this situation. With every challenge, there is a seed of an equal or equivalent benefit, right? Or looking at this, what does this get us back into that I talked about recently? It gets us into the victim thinking, which of course causes more and more of that to perpetuate itself. The more of the victim thinking we get, the more that we operate from a scarcity mindset because we say there's not enough to go around. I'm never gonna have this. It's never gonna work out for me. I'm not good enough. The more that we come from this abundance, the more that we're saying, hey, there's tons of opportunity out here for me. There's tons of amazing possibilities everywhere that I go. Now, you could also look at this as, what do we do when we're in between? Is thinking, yeah, I acknowledge that certain situations may not be the most favorable, but again, we get the chance, we get to decide, we can lean, we can tilt the scales more in this direction. And honestly, it's better to walk around with rose-colored glasses than to walk around with distorted lenses that are making everything look like terrible in our reality. It's better to lean into a little bit of that delusion that, hey, everything's working in my favor. The types of people that are able to achieve success view things in that way. They come from an abundance mindset. They say, hey, there's opportunities everywhere. And if this didn't work out, I'm not gonna fall back into here. I'm gonna stabilize out. I'm gonna use my emotional state control. And I'm gonna use these tools I have at my disposal. Talked about Ho'oponopono recently. Another tool is like forgiveness. Forgiveness of something. If something did you wrong, if somebody did you wrong, if there's a circumstance that, there was malevolence, it's not going to help to dwell on that. It's going to push us back into this. It's going to push us back into this unproductive state, right? So begin to take note of this. And as you begin to see yourself falling in, as you begin to tip the scales over here, you'll begin to say, hey, you know what? Reframe it. It's always constant reframes. This control over this rhythm is really about frame control. And when you're able to do that, you're able to see a situation, but also see the potential positives in that situation. Or you even see the situation, you say, well, that's not going to stop me, right? It's just going to make me go even harder. It's going to make me, it's not going to stop me, right? I'm not going to let it define me to say that this situation is impossible for me. I'm going to rise above it. I'm going to transcend it, rise above the swing of the pendulum. So, yeah, this is a universal law right here, and you can experience it in so many different ways. We talked about in the last video that that example I gave at the beginning of this is like, okay, do you want to be like a hard ass, or do you want to be this person that is, neither of those is good, but actually the ability to be a little bit of both in any given situation. It's like, do you want to zoom in so small on the thing that you're only focused on this, or do you want to look at the big picture? You want to be able to do both. Michael Jordan, one of the reasons he was so successful at basketball was he kind of, up until that point, people would choose, do they want to be a defensive player or an offensive player? But Michael Jordan, excuse me, wanted to perfect both. He wanted to be good at both. And so people had never seen anybody play basketball like that before. He didn't fall into this paradigm that it has to be one or the other. He said, okay, I'm gonna do this in a way that I allow maybe these ups and downs, but I'm not going to be so pulled by these ups and downs that I'm at the mercy of them. Right? We become at the mercy of our emotions a lot of the times. A lot of the times, we're not conscious, we're not present. That's another thing. Another way of looking at this is what is it when we're living in the past? What do we tend to do? When we tend to live in the future and have concern of the future, we live in a state of anxiety. And the past, we live in a state of worry. Or sorry, not worry. We live in a state of depression. Again, these are both, living in the past, living in the past here, worried about the future. But in the middle here, we have presence. And what you begin to find is that the more presence you have, the more that you're able to bring yourself back into the center again, which is the now, which is really all that is, as Eckhart Tolle would say, you're going to be able to do what it needs to be done in the present moment. You're going to be here in the present moment. So whether you're interacting with somebody, whether you're getting your project going, whether you are addressing something that's going on in your current reality, you're not going to be coming from this very fearful, anxious state. And you're not going to be coming from this very oh, it's never going to work for me. Another way of, this again goes into the attachment theory, which is like my classic example. Anxious, avoidant. The person who lives in the past thinks, I'm never going to get what I want because it never worked out for me in the past, right? Regarding whatever it is. The person who lives in the future says, I'm afraid it's not going to work out because I want it so much, but, and another way, I see there's this, you can see as I keep going here and erasing these things, because I keep getting more of these popping into my mind as I'm doing this, is that this is constantly happening. There's constantly flip-flopping back and forth between these binary states, which as human beings, we're so prone to becoming binary in our thinking, black and white. Here we have the superiority complex. And we have the inferiority complex. And with this is based on Adlerian. In between both of these things, what do we have here? We have courage. So in Adlerian psychology, and I've talked about this book because it's such a great book, is The Courage to be Disliked. That book goes over how a lot of people that you tend to observe tend to fall into, again, these camps. And there's parallels between some of the other things, some of the other polarities that we've talked about. But essentially, this inferiority complex is going to be somebody that is probably, you could liken it more towards the avoidant that we talked about before. That what Adler describes is that this person begins to entertain safeguarding behaviors, which are essentially distractions from actually taking action, actually embodying that which is what they want, going towards the desire, having courage. Now, the superiority complex, funny enough, and this is why I talked before about the kind of horseshoe theory. And really, this horseshoe is similar to this. It's similar to a cycle. It's similar to all of these things. You could, if you looked at this from a 3D perspective, this wave, you could also look at it as a spiral. You could also look at it from a metaphysical perspective. It is this donut shape, and it's constantly spiraling, right? Not to get too crazy metaphysical to take us off topic, but when you go so far to one extreme or the other, you're actually closer to, this is actually very similar to this. And so the reason for this is because the superiority complex, what you notice with inferiority is you notice people, they're very vacillating, they don't want to make a decision, they want to avoid things, right? That's what we talked about. It's safeguarding behaviors. They're like, oh, it's because of this. It's very similar to the victim thinking. In fact, it is. I want to avoid it. I want to, put my tail between my legs and avoid this whole situation. And then on the flip side of this is almost a compensation. It's compensatory behavior that stems from the same feelings of inferiority. That's what Adler describes. And you can see this in life, that when you see a lot of people that are taking up tons of space and are coming in super loud, and a boss that comes in at work just throwing his weight around and just yelling at everybody like, what is this, blah, blah, blah. Somebody that's super aggressive, maybe they start throwing things around. What is that really stemming from? If you really look behind the curtain, you'll really come to realize that this person is compensating from feelings of inferiority. And unfortunately, that is what it is. That's what, narcissism is. This very malignant narcissism, NPD, the people that are just so, basically self-serving while putting others down, that type of energy, it stems from this feeling of inferiority. And so again, we see that neither of these two extremes is going to be very positive for our growth, for our ability to maintain this emotional control, which is really at the heart, again, of this ability to create in our lives. We have to be able to have this be in the center here again. And again, this could be, sometimes you might feel inferior, sometimes or superior. Sometimes you might feel that sense of pride after you've accomplished something. And that's not to say that that's always bad, but we want to be more like this blue line here than we want to be this huge, black line that we have that's flip-flopping and ping-ponging back and forth between these things. Because that's something that you'll notice as well, is that there's different types of narcissism. There's a vulnerable narcissism where they always paint themselves as the victim, and everything is blamed. Everything is a reason to cast blame on somebody else, to say that I'm the victim. But again, you're overinflating yourself by that, ironically. I know it sounds kind of weird and maybe strange and paradoxical, but that's really what's going on. These are very, very close to the same thing. So when we're able to adopt this courage, we're able to, again, come into balance here. It's more about the center. And it's more about operating with that ability to acknowledge certain things, acknowledge that we have certain strengths, but we also have maybe certain weaknesses, and not have this inflated superiority, but also not have this deflated sense of self, which is saying that I can't do anything. The last thing that I'm going to cover is also the comparison trap. The comparison trap is another thing that we fall into when we say, I am less than. Like, we get onto social media, right? And this again, it builds into this inferiority complex. I'm less than all these people, or I'm greater than all these people. And again, they both come from this kind of baseline of just comparing, because it's like we need to, and to a certain degree, this is why I don't like the black and white thinking, guys, because there's some people that will tell you, never care what anybody thinks about, never compare yourself to anybody, right? That's kind of an impossible task, because we've been socially engineered. We are social creatures. We're always going to have that desire to be social with the people. And one of our ways of doing that is to find our place in our social community, in our social tribe. And so to some degree or another, you will always have this comparison. There always will be that. But the key is that rather than falling into this trap where we, again, get pushed around by the 3D and we become reactive and fall into this comparison trap, let's talk about, because that's what it is. It's a trap. It's, again, pushing you into this false dichotomy that it has to be one or the other. I'm either way better than this person, or I'm not as good at this person. And then you see those people that kiss up to people, the brown nosers, those type of people that are just kissing everybody's ass all the time. Nobody really likes that, genuinely. And then the other types of people that are always just trying to, again, throw their weight around, act holier than thou. They think they're the best, better than everybody else, the bullies, right? And you see it in the playground, but you also see it in the office. You also see it as adults, okay? So the key to this is, instead of comparing ourselves so hardcore to everybody around us, is comparing ourselves to our past self. Am I doing better than this self? And it's really a matter of inputs and outputs, because this self of our past, and here we have our present self, or now, and also the future. But who have you been being? What types of belief systems does this past self have? What type of behavior? you'll find that your behavior and your belief systems oftentimes are very inextricably linked. Because if you have the belief system that, or if you have the behavior, let's say that you've been sitting around, you've been lying in your bed around all day, you haven't been doing what it is that you want to do, you're going to tend to be seduced by this type of belief system. You're going to tend to, because the human body, the human mind can't handle so much cognitive dissonance all the time, that it's always saying, oh yeah, I believe in self-efficacy, I believe in self-actualization, I believe that I can rise to the occasion, but yet here I am kind of just, what do they call it now? Bed rot. That's like a new trend that I see. It's like a social Gen Z trend where you're just rotting away in your bed. So you're going to tend to carry a belief system that's in alignment with your behavior, right? So if you look at this, now you can say, okay, well, I did do this thing. I did create a list. I did check off some of the stuff on my list that I was meant to do. And it's all about a work in progress. It's all about this step-by-step positive direction. As long as you're going in this direction, then you won't be going in this direction. And getting yourself up, picking yourself up by the bootstraps, so to speak, and having that courage daily. And that's what we talked about in the last video, is the ability to make decisions on an ongoing basis. And it's this decision that I'm going to have the courage. I'm going to, change my behavior, which is going to also change my belief systems. This is a feedback loop. Your behavior affects your belief systems, and your belief systems also affect your behavior. So it's about understanding that you are now compiling, and then it's about inputs and outputs. What you put in, this is what goes in, and this is what comes out. And this is a feedback loop again. Because now, let's say that you're working on a project, or it could be any example where it's like, I'm gonna take care of my diet. I'm gonna begin to make food at home once a week. So now you have this, instead of eating fast food all the time, now you have this input of eating healthier food, and then it goes into here. And then once you have this becomes your new baseline. And over time, by repeating this feedback loop and improving and making micro improvements over time, that's how we become. That's how we embody this. That's how we embody courage, and we become that version of ourselves that is this 2.0 self, this 2.0 that can actually rise and accomplish more. But one thing that we're going to want to avoid on this is like falling into this comparison trap. That's why it can be important to log off of social media sometimes, get away from like Instagram, just get away from comparing yourself all the time, because it's really, that idea is really pushing you into this again. It's pushing you into this flip-flopping back and forth, this ride on this roller coaster. And like I said before, we want to get into this more solid, stable place. We want to utilize the principle of rhythm to our advantage and maintain, within this region. And we might feel down, we might feel good, we might have that sense of pride after we accomplish something, but we get back to the moment, we get back to the present, because this is where we can actually make a change. This is where we can actually become in that present moment. And by immersing ourselves, getting into the flow, this is also the flow state that people talk about, where now we're actually having more enjoyment as well, because now we're in the present moment where we found a task that's challenging. It's not too challenging so that it is too difficult. That's another one of these things. If something's too easy, we won't be in the flow state. But if it's too difficult, we won't be able to do anything. We want a challenge. A challenge that makes us, that pushes us, it pushes ourselves in this direction, right? So, I know this whiteboard is getting messy here, and there's a lot of things that we've talked about, but I hope that going over this with the principle of rhythm, seeing how that we get trapped into these false dichotomies of comparison, we get trapped into, feeling inferior, feeling superior. So much of our lives is explained by the principle of polarity, the principle of rhythm, and how we're able to use this to our advantage rather than allowing the 3D to push us around so much. We can master this. We can become a master, like they say in alchemy. And that's really when we become like a wizard. We become a magician. We become like a mage. And then we are able to exert our will, exert our imagination in a way that is actually transforming ourselves. A lot of the times too, people can psych themselves out. Sometimes, you know, people have, and that's why it's always dependent on you and your emotional state. Sometimes people say that affirmations or something doesn't work for them. Well, it could be the fact that it's going for something that you don't believe in, right? If you start affirming to yourself, if you're in a state where you're working a minimum wage job and you start affirming to yourself, I'm gonna be making $100 million next year. It's kind of just like, why do that? You know, you wanna take things one step at a time. You wanna be process oriented. That's like, how am I gonna get to the next phase, to the next phase, to the next phase? And that's the way that we can do this in a very sustainable way. If you guys are interested in diving into more of these concepts, I have the book coming out very soon. You can click on the link below in the description to get on the wait list for the book, and I'll be releasing it once it comes out to everybody that's on the list. And with that being said, let me know what you thought about this. Let me know if you resonate with these ideas. If you understand, if this has helped, you know, talking about Adlerian psychology, I love pulling all these ideas together because I feel like there's so much to be gained when we combine these different theories and these different kind of models of thought, of psychology, and of some of these esoteric teachings together to really understand what's going on at a fundamental level. So that being said, guys, much love as always. Drop this with a like I said. Let me know what you thought. Hit me with a subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video.